You've felt this before. Someone walks into a room and says absolutely nothing, and somehow the energy shifts anyway. People sit up slightly straighter, conversations soften, attention moves toward them without anyone deciding to give it. And your first instinct is to assume it's confidence, or charisma, or some rare magnetic personality trait they were simply born with. But that instinct is wrong, and it's wrong in a way that's actually useful to understand, because what's really happening has almost nothing to do with confidence or charisma at all. It has to do with a set of invisible signals your body reads instantly, long before your conscious mind has time to explain what it noticed. Here's the first thing worth understanding, and it will probably surprise you. Confidence, the loud, expressive, look at me kind of confidence most people associate with commanding a room, often does the opposite of what people think it does. A person who talks quickly, gestures constantly, and works hard to be noticed is broadcasting something your nervous system picks up on immediately, even if you can't name it: effort. And effort, whether it's social effort or any other kind, signals need. It says, I require your attention to feel secure right now. People who genuinely command a room without speaking are almost never doing this. They're doing something much quieter, something that looks like the opposite of trying, and that absence of visible effort is exactly what your instincts read as authority. So if it's not confidence in the way most people define it, what is it actually? It comes down to a handful of specific, learnable signals, most of which have nothing to do with personality and everything to do with behavior, which means they can be understood and eventually practiced by anyone paying close enough attention. The first signal is stillness, not stiffness, not frozen posture, but the absence of unnecessary movement. Most people, especially in moments of social tension, leak small, constant signs of unease. Shifting weight from foot to foot, adjusting clothing, touching their face or hair, fidgeting with a phone, a pen, anything within reach. None of these movements are consciously chosen. They're the body discharging low-level anxiety in real time, and everyone around that person picks up on it instantly, even if they couldn't describe what they noticed. Someone who commands a room without speaking has usually, whether by nature or by training, dropped almost all of this. Their body isn't leaking anxiety into the room, which means the room doesn't absorb any either. Stillness reads as containment, and containment, to the human nervous system, reads as strength. The second signal is unhurried movement, specifically, how someone moves through space and time. Watch how a person who commands attention picks up a glass, turns to look at someone, or crosses a room. There's no rush in it, no sense of trying to get somewhere or finish something quickly. Compare that to someone who's anxious for approval, whose every movement has a faint undertone of urgency, reaching, checking, glancing. Speed, in social settings, almost always reads as a kind of subordination, because urgency implies that something outside of you is dictating your pace. Slowness, when it's not performative, reads as the opposite. It says nothing outside of me is currently controlling my timing, and that alone is read, instantly and unconsciously, as a form of status. The third signal is the way someone handles silence. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with pauses in conversation, and that discomfort shows. They rush to fill gaps, laugh nervously, ask a quick follow-up question just to keep the exchange moving, anything to avoid the slightly exposed feeling of a silence that lasts a beat too long. Someone who commands respect without speaking tends to do the opposite. They let silence exist without rushing to patch it. This isn't coldness. It's simply an absence of the anxious need to manage every gap in interaction, and other people read that absence as ease, which very quickly gets translated, unconsciously, into authority. The fourth signal, and one of the most powerful, is eye contact that isn't seeking anything. There's a specific, subtle difference between eye contact that says, I'm checking whether you like what I just said, and eye contact that simply observes without needing a particular response back. The first kind, even when it looks steady on the surface, usually carries a flicker of monitoring, watching for approval, for reaction, for a cue about how to adjust. The second kind is calmer, less reactive, less hungry for feedback, and it's remarkably easy for other people to sense the difference, even when they can't explain exactly what they're picking up on. Eye contact that isn't asking for anything reads as someone who isn't dependent on your reaction, and dependence, or the absence of it, is one of the most powerful signals of status that exists. The fifth signal is the absence of over-explaining or over-qualifying. People who feel they need to earn the room's approval tend to soften everything they say with disclaimers. This might be a dumb question. I could be wrong. Sorry to interrupt. Just a small thing. But every one of these phrases is a tiny signal of subordination, a preemptive apology for taking up space at all. People who command respect without speaking, and often when they do speak as well, tend to state things plainly, without wrapping them in apology. This isn't arrogance. It's simply the absence of an unspoken request for permission to exist in the conversation, and that absence reads, instantly, as someone who belongs exactly where they are. Here's what ties all 5 of these signals together, and it's the part most people miss entirely. None of them are about projecting confidence outward. They're all about the absence of anxious management, the absence of visible effort to be liked, approved of, or accepted. Every single signal that reads as commanding presence is really just the lack of a signal that normally reads as need. Stillness is the absence of leaked anxiety. Unhurried movement is the absence of urgency. Comfort with silence is the absence of a need to fill space. Non-seeking eye contact is the absence of monitoring for approval. Plain speech is the absence of preemptive apology. Presence, in other words, isn't built by adding something impressive. It's built by removing the small, constant signals of insecurity that most people broadcast without ever realizing it. This is also why so many attempts to fake this kind of presence fall apart instantly. You can't perform stillness while your mind is racing to be noticed, because the racing leaks out anyway, in a tightness around the eyes, a slightly too quick laugh, a subtle overcorrection. These signals aren't really about controlling your body. They're downstream of something calmer happening internally, a level of security that doesn't require the room's approval to feel intact. Trying to fake the external behavior without addressing the internal need usually just produces a stiffer, more effortful version of the same anxiety, which people read just as easily as the original. So where does that internal security actually come from? Mostly from one simple, uncomfortable practice: tolerating the discomfort of not immediately managing how you're perceived. Every one of the 5 signals requires letting a moment sit unmanaged, a pause without filling it, a movement without rushing it, a silence without softening it, a statement without qualifying it. And the only way to get comfortable doing that is to practice it in small, low-stakes moments repeatedly, letting yourself feel exposed for a second or two and discovering, over and over, that nothing bad actually happens. Over time, this rewires the automatic response, the fidgeting, the rushing, the over-explaining, until stillness and unhurried presence stop feeling like a performance and start feeling like your actual default. This is also why some people seem to have had this quality their whole lives. Often they simply grew up in environments where their presence wasn't constantly questioned, where they didn't have to perform for safety or approval, so the anxious management never got installed as deeply in the first place. But the reverse is just as true. Anyone who did grow up managing every room for safety can slowly unlearn it, not by trying harder to look confident, but by practicing the specific, small tolerances underneath each of these 5 signals, one uncomfortable, unmanaged moment at a time. So if you've ever wondered why some people seem to shift a room's energy without saying a word, this is what's actually happening. It was never about being the loudest, the most expressive, or the most obviously confident person in the space. It was about the absence of the small, constant signals that broadcast need, replaced by a quiet, unhurried presence that doesn't require anyone's approval to feel complete. And once you know what to look for, you'll start noticing it everywhere, in the people who never seem to be trying, and in the small, specific moments you have the chance to practice it yourself. If any part of this resonated with you, if you recognized someone you know in these signals, or maybe even caught a glimpse of yourself in the anxious version of them, leave a comment and let me know what stood out. Chances are, you're not the only one who's noticed this. Thanks for listening to episodes of Kynn. Take care of your mind, and I'll see you in the next episode.